Thank you very much, Diana, for that introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone here and virtually online. Thank you again for the organizers for the invitation to speak to you today on a topic that is so close to my heart in terms of my over 22 years of academy, being involved in the academy, research and teaching, but also the involvement in international activities or international debates and discourses on various topics, including urban development, which still is pretty much a field that is, I would arguably say, less appreciated or understood from the global south perspective. So that is the main message in today's lecture from my side. And what a befitting title of how to bridge the knowledge gap between local and global. Let's see how that goes. But what I would also like to inform you about is that I have taken liberty to kind of fuse my personal academia and career experiences into the knowledge domain around urban issues and climate change. So part of my story in this presentation actually is a reflection of my real life experiences. So my personal story has always been about the inquest to understand how things work. I was born and lived at the edge of the premier university in Uganda, Makerere University, in an upper middle income family, but in a lower income settlement that you would otherwise call a slum. And I saw with lived experience a lot of things happening that we are still grappling with, both from science, but also policy. And that kind of seeded the inquest. What is going on and how can we address these issues? And along the way, midway my academic career, 2018, in the ramp up to 2018 World Urban Forum, we formed what we call the Urban Knowledge Arena, which eventually became the Urban Action Lab based at Makerere University, as I'll be saying, I'll be showing you. But working as an Africa-based researcher, not African per se, but Africa-based researcher in collaboration with academics and researchers in what we now these days loosely call Global North, has also been very interesting as a point of reflection through my career. And this is a collaboration, though there have been multiple collaborations with individuals, but also institutions, one of which is the University of Manchester and several others in Europe and Americas. I've also been involved in global and international processes of engagement, as mentioned earlier. And growing up in this family, what I want to illustrate with this slide is that I was, as a young academic or scholar at undergraduate, with that background of the inquest to understand what is going on, I was advised by my professor to read widely. And there is no literature piece that influenced my thinking then, which is now the springboard of the reflections that I'm talking about today, like the Hoge Hadroi, The Poor Die Young. That book is an old piece in the sense that it's over 30 years since it was published. It had a really very nuanced assessment and analysis of what goes on in the settlements, similar to the one that I lived in or I was born in Kampala, which is on the extreme right. And as a young scholar at undergraduate, based on that experiential knowledge, I was always wondering what can be done about the many issues around us, the garbage heaps around us, the potholes on the roads, the street lights that only go on for a few hours and then go off for months in the 80s and the 70s by then. That's what used to happen. The running water that only does so for 1.5 hours or 30 minutes and goes off for several weeks, if not months, if not a year. What can be done about it? And I did grounded research at the 3 levels of my academic career: an undergraduate honors thesis on housing problems, very much influenced by the thinking of Hadwe, and then environmental quality. Now with the planning starting to come into my thinking and academic career, what does this environmental quality mean, and what can planning do to improve environmental quality and also enhance well-being and health of communities, not only in slums, but also in urban systems generally. And then later on, again, grappling with the question, is there anything that we can call planning for cities? By then, we'll be calling it developing countries. Now, Global South. And there's so many articles and so many publications, one of which that I could remember is one publication that I think was, it came out of research in a number of startup countries in Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and Lake. Forget politics, forget planning, politics first. That piece also influenced a lot of work that we have done at the Urban Action Lab, which culminated into some of the publications as books that we have developed along the way. Then, after my master's degree, I immediately enrolled for PhD. And then that was also around the time when there was this era of advanced institutes. The tooling is the training of trainers and retooling academies or advanced institutes, which were organized by international institutions of capacity building orientation. So I started, without knowing, positioning myself into the academy, without explicitly knowing that perhaps that's what I was doing. Multiple international postgraduate trainings and workshops across Europe, Americas, and within Africa. And I was introduced to a much more in-depth understanding and assessment of what is going on at a global level through the International Human Dimensions program, which was part of the Global Environmental Change series of programs. So Diversitas and all the rest as we know them, WCRP, some of which that have ended up actually being involved either as a member of the Scientific Advisory Board or one leading or coordinating some of the working groups, including the most recent is the Risk Knowledge Action Network. And then at Makerere University, a lot of students were coming from different parts of the world. They wanted to know why things are not working the way the textbooks and the literature is talking about. Why is it that the pipes are not working? Why is it that the pumps are not working? Is it an issue of corruption? Is it an issue of lack of resources? What is happening? Funded research started rolling in, and the biggest by then, leading a multi-institutional, multi-colleague and multi-million-dollar project. How I came to that position, I didn't know. Perhaps it's the positioning that I was talking about, which was focus city, one city and one neighborhood at a time. How can you turn environmental burdens into benefits? Very eye-opening. Perhaps unaware about what was happening. And then international visibility started kicking in. So we started running young early career workshops, not being the trainees, but actually organizing the trainings, many of which occurred in Europe. So you're part of the organizing committee based in Uganda, but the event is happening in Europe. Advanced institutes, very technical skills, training workshops in geoinformation and spatial technologies, all of which were also weaved with various international engagements at World Urban Forum and other international debates around or focus on either urban development, planning, or climate change. That is how I reflect on the way I somehow got position to get to position myself into the academy. And in that process, it became very clear to me that local knowledge is a very vital piece of not just the debates, but also the theories that we always have been using to frame what goes wrong and what goes right and what doesn't have work and how certain things may be able to work. And local knowledge, by then and still now, is still looked at as, can we get a case from Uganda, and we get a case from Malawi in Kalonga, can we get a case from Dhaka in Naminadu, can we get a case study? Can we make a collection of various case studies and then synthesize that and understand what is going on in urban Africa and perhaps theoretically global South? The problem is that there's so many case studies that have been documented and published about in literature and very much analyzed using theoretical frameworks that are global north oriented. And that is any case study that does not align with the theoretical framework. This is my interpretation, is simply noise in the academy. That is noise. We need it fixed. So these case studies have always been almost like gap fillers or reinforcement of these theoretical frameworks. And in the policy domain, there are further justification for the financial mobilization, technical support mobilization to ramp up and speed up investments in urban development in the global South. No wonder MDBs, the multilateral development banks, are still very much pursuing development in many parts of the world, not only Africa, using those lenses. But in terms of debates and being engaged in the academy, at a personal level, the roles have also always been predefined. You are going to bring a case study to enrich the discussion at a panel. Tell us about things that have not worked in Kampala. These are very, very common leads when there is an engagement about an international debate. The most recent actually is COP26 in Glasgow. I gave a case study, and the Resilience Hub Blue Zone, on the reclaiming of legitimacy of the public institution of Kampala, focused on sanitation and water. And on the panel, there were lectures on predictability of urban with very high profile global companies. I will not mention them. There were lectures and presentations on how to fix resilience. And I questioned that. I said, how do you fix resilience? Is it a matter of getting the nuts and bolts and the spanners and then say, okay, I've fixed this joint, now it's flexible enough, it's, you know, I've greased it, it should be working? Is that the case? So there are many, many, many issues and questions around the approach. And that has motivated some of us and a lot of other people to actually start theorizing on the basis of urban Africa. So no wonder now there is Global South urbanism. And some of the leads, like Supanel, Peter Say from SEC, those are colleagues that we worked with and we continue to debate with. Peter Ngao in Nairobi and several other people. And some of the outputs of the vitality of local knowledge in some of the pictures on this slide. engaging local communities on the land eviction issue up there, engaging in enterprises that otherwise the traditional frameworks of development and policy would look at as noise. That is noise, we have to fix it. And then this notion of building back better. What we are saying from urban Africa and the global south generally is build better before you build back better. Building better before building back better. It means a lot, it could be loaded, and if we unpack that, it's about many things that I'm going to talk about in the subsequent slides or in the subsequent slides. And this is an interesting piece. This article featured in one of the newspapers in Stockholm, in Sweden. Through the international engagements and the debates, I was asked to write a piece for Stockholm so that people in Sweden can understand what goes on in the global south, having lived and worked in Kampala, both as a resident, but as an academic and planner, because I also partly worked for some time in the municipality, for some time there. So that was also very interesting. And the reaction and the response from that article, when it was published, was very interesting as well. So many collaborations, so many engagements with international students, coming to Makerere University, hosting them, giving them lectures, taking them around, connecting them with communities, community leaders, urban local knowledge, urban knowledge arena, Urban Action Lab was born immediately after the World Urban Forum in 2018. And associated with that was also the Habitat Partner Universities Initiative, and Makerere University still coordinates the climate change and disaster hub, which I still affiliate with. So from all that, that's a summary of my story so far. One of the lessons that I take from that is what I represent in this figure, to say that all the engagements and the collaborations have somewhat seemingly had a hierarchical order of research roles. So the local knowledge, the local academics in Bwaise, it's a settlement somewhere. Mukuru, it's a settlement in Nairobi. I think it's popular these days for some reason. In Dhaka, in Manzese, it used to be popular in the 90s. I'm not sure whether it is still popular. Perhaps Kinondoni is more popular now. In Dar es Salaam, Gisozi in Kigali, it is popular to some communities. Sheikh al-Sham, it used to be popular. I don't know whether it is still popular. These are all different local specific sites where there's been immense, very valuable research by academics in that the locales, but also students and other academics from international institutions. And then those case studies are collected, clustered: housing, sanitation, water, drainage systems, waste collection, housing, culture and upgrading, income inequalities, housing and neighborhoods. That seems to be a preserve of international researchers. The synthesis, hypothesizing, postulations and theorization also seems to be a preserve for some researchers, and not across all researchers, irrespective of their base. So local researchers, as they are called now, that is our thesis today, and local knowledge generators are immersed into the local specifics to give more case studies, to give more data points. And this seems to me, at least as a lesson for me and reading, that there is some kind of hierarchical order. But then there is this international engagement that I've been involved in, where I bring the local knowledge, or you can think of it as globalizing urban development knowledge through the collaborations I've talked about, case studies. And there's been a little bit of backlash or critique, I wouldn't call it backlash, critique of the case studies. They are not representative enough in terms of some. These are anecdotes, it's not data, they're not quantifiable. And therefore they're boxed somewhere in a report. A small box, Kampala case study, Sheikh Al-Sham case study, somewhere, waste management study. Despite the fact that we continuously bring this knowledge to the international stage, if you will, universal level. And we do that through a lot of engagements at different places, different locations, in different geographies, with evidence. And despite the quantifiable evidence, like in the case of flash floods, or in the case of social and income inequalities in cities, when it comes to housing, sanitation, and water, there is evidence that things are not working. I'll give you a simple statistic. In many cities in urban Africa, less than 15% of households, thereof people, have connections to piped water. Oh, that's a problem we need to fix. We need to bring more pipes. We need to build more water systems. But this has been going on for decades. So the question then a scientist would ask, or an academic, what is happening with the 85%? Oh, they're getting from spring wells, open surface water systems, underground pumping, and like, oh, but that is not quality water. You're getting sick. You're getting sick, yes, but some of them have lived their entire life, even over the statistical life expectancy in their countries, in and using that water. There is definitely an issue with that water. But should we negate the alternatives that are happening? Oh, that's anecdotal. So we don't have good enough information about the quality of that water. It cannot be regulated. Lots of things always come in. And in the process, the globalization of urban knowledge is more or less of a storm. By urban knowledge, I'll come later to explain why. But before I come to that, the lesson from that is that there is an issue about a theoretical fit. In other words, there is no theoretical fit of what is happening in many urban places in Africa and Global South, and what the theories actually tell us. And perhaps we could also arguably say that urban Africa is possibly a black swan, as this name says, because the existing in that figure up there, urban is infrastructure has to be fixed. Institutions are fragmented. Why? Because there's a water department, there's an environmental department, waste collection department. They are separated. And that's how the system has been built. The regulations tend to be rigid and very restrictive in many cases. But what we are seeing in experience is the one below, that there is diversity of infrastructure systems. There's also hybridity and heterogeneity. They are working. They may not be to the standard that the framings do tell us, but they seem to be working. Institutions are evolving. So you go to Nairobi city, and you'll go to some settlements where there is a pipe water system from a utility company that serves Nairobi. But beyond a certain boundary entering into that neighborhood, the officials or workers of that utility company don't enter that neighborhood. Somebody else controls that resource. How do you explain that? That's an evolution, perhaps, of some regulation and institutions. And we see this in many other cities. Trust. There seems to be a lot more trust with this kind of emerging local informal institutions with the population in the locales than with the officials of the municipalities. Should we negate that as well? Besides the theoretical fit question, there's also a policy and practice fit. It's pipes and pumps, or concrete and steel. So if you're flooding, your neighborhood is flooding, we're going to build more drainage channels. if you don't have water, we're going to bring more, construct and lay more pipes to serve water to your neighborhood. And that machine, if you will, is becoming very difficult to turn around. And if you put it in the context of the climate change crisis, if you will, the lessons from the pandemic, then all indicators could be that the machine has to be turned around in some way, even if it is not wholesome, but maybe by thinking about the alternatives. Which brings me to the figure on the right bottom there, that perhaps we need to rethink these 5 elements in planning and urban development. The blue, the green, the gray, and they're circled there. How do we integrate those? Because for the moment, most urban plans actually separate them. But we also need to find a way of integrating them with the human and the culture. A number of cities, for example, in the MENA, North Africa region, have evolved out of a policy decision that we need more housing, go in the desert, carve out this piece of land, plan settlements, develop it, and pay people will settle in there. How is it related to the human and culture? Are we seeing again this question of the black swan? And what do we deal with how do we deal with the black swan? So with these next slides, I would like to quickly walk you through some of the emerging knowledge on the many aspects that have always been described as not working in urban Africa, but where we think the hybridity, heterogeneity, and alternatives could be the building blocks, could be the black swans for rethinking urban development from Africa. And that is the comparison between the formal and informal. And I would like to suggest that we replace in the literature, in our debates, informal with emerging, because there is a potential. There is an emerging urban economic sector. It's very creative, seems to be very innovative, very local context. It is industrious. It has provided careers for many people. Many people have spent their lifetime into informal settlements and informal economic activity. And in literature, some literature, there is some evidence that attests to the fact that they don't pay taxes. Actually, it is the opposite. They actually pay multiple taxes. If you think about the case of Nairobi, who controls the water in that hypothetical neighborhood? I want to mention it. And the emerging sector is also absorbing many people who are unemployed and underemployed. It's a reaction of the imperfection of the urban development and labor market system. There is much higher supply of labor than the demand of the formal sector, which is one of the problems of urban planning. That the assumption that once you lay out the urban plan, industrial, commercial, and the like, then seamlessly the people coming into the urban will get jobs in industry. And seamlessly, industrial establishments will be in the places that you have zoned as industrial. In Africa, it doesn't work that way. Actually, we see much more mix even in terms of land use. Oversupply may also prompt income generating activities, but this emerging sector seems to be a part of an urban labor market, but which is a blind spot or a black hole in many ways. There is self-employment, therefore they are entrepreneurs. Despite the fact that they may not have vocational training or formal entrepreneurial skills, but they're entrepreneurs. And there's increasing evidence around that. A good number of media companies are documenting that across Africa. They are diverse in nature. The workers are diverse, enterprises are diverse, and they range from micro, small, medium enterprises. And this is where they seem to be so important in at least aligning a little bit with one theoretical framework of flexible specialization. The theory of flexible specialization. It's much applied in business, but I think we can also use the analogy of flexible specialization in the urban labor market, where I may not be an electrician, but I may have some knowledge about wiring, electric circuits and systems. Therefore, if there is a job, I'll do it. But at the same time, if there is a need to fix a leaking water pipe, I can still fix it because it's spanners and nuts. Flexible specialization seems to be one framework that could be useful here. Very rapidly, as I said, small and micro enterprises, always not registered, relatively low capital investments, relatively low technology, relatively low productivity, but perhaps with the potential, and they're very much survival oriented. Now, these are pictorials of some examples from our research work. From a commercial toilet, rental housing, dialoguing with leaders here in the middle, savings groups, pro-poor, prepaid water system. So where the expectation is that the water pipe should come to the house, but the house is of this type, therefore it cannot be connected practically. Is that an alternative? Is it a hybrid system? And how can it connect with the utility company? Urban and peri-urban agriculture and forestry, underestimated. And again, Torres talked about as anecdotal, but supporting a good number of people within urban areas who are able to read the market and really assess the high value products that they can produce within space-confined technologies. And those alternatives, when it comes to using materials around you, whether organic or inorganic, the recycling sector, energy briquettes, paper materials, metal materials, all of which are being recycled. And that is a huge industry in many cities, Kampala, Nairobi, on the extreme right there. Those utensils are coming from reused metallic products, which would otherwise have been produced by a mega industry that is overhauling tons and tons of steel, melting it in order to roll it and make the utensils, which are new. But that industry is also not on the radar of many urban development practitioners. This level of organization in terms of energy briquettes, product development, product promotion, product marketing, can we really not think about this as emerging? So we started off with how to bridge local and global knowledge. But before we started, there was a very, very private discussion here about the title. I was like, yeah, but do we need a title, or should I just talk about my experience of knowledge? So the antithesis to the title of the presentation is that perhaps we should be talking about bridging local and global epistemology in global South urbanism through international collaborative research lenses. It's not really an antithesis, but it is at least different from thinking that there is something called local knowledge and there is also global knowledge. The antithesis here is that there is no such a thing as local knowledge. There is no such a thing as global knowledge. And I would like to use the picture here of, again, a friend and colleague, an national that Robert Shuaib, who says all knowledge, he hypothesizes that all knowledge is that pie. But in the academy, we only have that slice of the pie. So where is the other proportion of knowledge, and how is it documented? anecdotes, non-quantifiable. So when we talk of nature-based solutions to climate change now, who knows it better than the pastoralists in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel, in Central Africa forest? Who knows it better? Is it the company that has positioned itself between the funding agencies now? Because now nature-based solutions is also emerging as an expertise field. In Africa, that's what we have been doing, whether in rural environments or even in urban areas. But now it is an expertise field. So is there anything like local or global knowledge? No, knowledge is knowledge, but positionality matters. It is positionality which brings up some of these notions of local and global. Positionality drivers include where are the resources coming from to do research. There is resource inequality. Where is the leadership? Leadership inequality. Who authors the many publications about urban Africa? Or at least who leads the authorship? Whose data and whose knowledge? I think, I don't know how many people know about SDI, Slum Dwellers International. With some of these very iconic programs like Know Your City, self-settlement enumeration. So whose knowledge is it? They have demonstrated that they can actually be the generators, owners, and curators of knowledge about their settlements. How much support is going into that? I'm not sure. And then, of course, that drives the urban development inequality. But despite these problems or issues, it's also a pathway. As a lesson with called international collaborative research, this research very much creates a pathway for increased visibility about urban Africa, global South urbanism, and Africa-based academics. And through that, the next generation of scientists and scholars is also emerging. I'm not sure that I am one of those, but a good number of them are emerging. Now that I've kind of passed a certain level of the curve. Now with that antithesis, the thesis then is that local as data points should or have to be multiple to become at least representative, now going back to the scientific approach, so that we can then do modeling, whether descriptive or predictive. And if we're able to do that, I feel that there is perhaps some knowledge that we might gather if we take the briquettes, the alternative water systems, into a model and the demographic shifts in Africa, see whether it is possible. Is it possible really to deconstruct urban Africa so that we can construct it with the frameworks that we have always done? Or should we think about this hybridity of water systems, briquettes, and other things? At least in transition as the list, because it's taken 40 years to debate about slum upgrading, deconstructing cities, urban management programs, cities without slums, all those programs, global programs. How much of success has been enlisted through those programs compared to the way and the speed at which settlements are growing? So from that, we can then draw congruencies and divergences. There will definitely be. Cairo is different from Dar es Salaam, and even within Dar es Salaam, there are also differences. And then we can start to rethink the black swan as noise, because it becomes informative. So the knowledge becomes informative that there's an alternative way of dealing with the urban issues, rather than thinking this is the only way, or these are the frameworks that we should be using. Then the leadership in terms of authorship in literature also needs to be changed. And that could be a conveyor for that. And then there's this co-production, local situated co-production. Again, another seeming field of expertise, but which has been the approach for many academics in local specific situations. Co-producing knowledge with communities. So Having said that, the antithesis is not all rosy. Yes, it is knowledge. The emerging sector is there, yes, hybridity, heterogeneity of systems, different ways of planning, perhaps, and thinking about planning. But there is a lot that we still don't know. And there is a lot that we can actually gather if we open up and do not only get stuck with specific theoretical frameworks. And the postulation that the informal is the city, the question then is how can it be embraced? What works in the informal and what analytical frameworks can we develop out of that? What is its potential? And how can we move beyond anecdotal case studies and beyond advocacy and show real evidence that energy briquettes is a business and it can provide so many jobs. It may not give the income in thousands of X currencies, but it's industrious. Linearity in urban development has not worked. You plan the city, put in the roads, water, blah, blah, and then seemingly or seamlessly or other, people will get employed in the industrial zones and they will not manage to pay for housing. That doesn't seem also to be working. What is the alternative? There's a lot to perhaps know and get into, to dig into. The issue of planning and whose space, whose order, and how do we define order? Going back to the master's thesis on environmental quality, how do you standardize environmental quality? People in Cairo and other desert cities live with very high air quality, poor air quality for so many days in a year because of sandstorms. But the average level in the sandstorms is usually over and above the WHO recommended. So what do we get from that? Urban labor markets and possibilities, careers can be also something to dig deep further into. How can these enterprises be developed, supported from micro to perhaps even medium level? That is a black hole in my thinking. And then rethinking urban regulation. Should we just deregulate informal settlements and those that do not conform to the legally planned, to the legal plan? Or should we think about flexible regulation, or should we think about adaptive guidance of urban development in many urban Africa? And this is just a few of perhaps the many black holes that we need to fill in the academy. And with that, I would like to end my talk and thank you very much for listening both online and